we have done already. Let's just review what we've already done in Access. Start up Access. I don't know about you, but I hate having 1,000 icons over my desktop. So I just like using the Windows keys, search for what I'm trying to run. I know one person there, just tons of them all over his desktop. AC3, opening previous. Oh, it didn't say enable. I must have had a little fun already. Remember what we have already done. Let's just review this real quick, just to refresh our brains here. We've adjusted the veterinary vendors, I think. Let's right-click Design View of Veterinary Vendors. And I'll see that, yes, we added a product type. And how do I know what it is? Well, remember we did a lookup. If I look here, I can sort of see the options. It might be easiest just to view Datasheet View, and I'll see the result of changing that product type, that it is a drop-down because I use the lookup wizard. And this is where Access gets confusing. Once you've done something, you want to go back and see what you did. The wizard's done, and you just have to figure out what did the wizard leave behind. And when I was playing with Access the very first time, I was so confused because I said, I want to do something like that. How did they do that? Well, I finally explored around and found this little thing, that it's a combo box that it made. Now you're not expected to know all about this. Just know that there's wizards in there to help you create the way of that working. But to actually go back and see what it did, well, the wizard did all that. We either rerun the wizard or explore through the design. Remember, another thing we did in the design is in the cost, that was currency, quantity. No, quantity was an integer. We changed that from an integer to a single, what we call single precision math, just so we could have fractional amounts in the quantity. And we did that by just choosing what kind of number in the properties after selecting that. We added the total amount. Another thing about that number, we also changed its decimal places from the default of, I think, automatic to 2. Just so we only would see 2 decimal places in the datasheet view of that. And that's viewable over here in the cost, where we see 2 decimals. No, the quantity. We could add decimals. See, it was initially integers, and now it could be a decimal and it won't complain. Where before it would have said, sorry, you can't do anything after a decimal because it was integers before. But it's up to them to decide when they actually care about using integer quantities. If it's just quantity of packages, then integers would have made the most sense. Because cost was currency type when we first designed it, back over here, design view, I can choose decimal places there too. We left that one on auto. Now there's lots of other things that we can mess with that you are welcome to play with, but don't worry about having to know. But just know that those things are there. When we go to design and have these things across the top, when we're in datasheet view, those are the things that they make available in the ribbons when we have different columns selected. That's what we did at the first. We adjusted things in the ribbon, but basically it's a quicker or maybe more user-friendly way of getting at the properties of each field name in our table. So we adjusted, remember what we did? We adjusted the quantity, changed the type of number that it was, and then we also did the product type. No, not product type. It was, it was in appointments. That's right. In appointments, in design view of appointments, we added treatments that, if I see in datasheet view, I see treatments allows me to choose multiple things with a checkbox. We did that again with the lookup wizard, showing with just one option checked, allow multiple values. It allows me to specify multiple treatments on a particular appointment. So modifying the database structure, design view, modifying existing fields. Remember, it's safest to add new fields. because none of the other queries know about any new fields we add. But if we ever change something, it may actually break queries that we're expecting the appointments or treatments to be a text and not a number. So you got to be super careful about changing the structure. It's safer to add new things in the structure, and you will very likely not break things that are depending on the previous structure. And it usually warns you if you're trying to do something that might break things. But there are often messages that don't make a whole lot of sense unless you stare at them for a while. Okay, so we've adjusted some field sizes. Let's see, now we want to make sure, we changed the decimals, field sizes on that, on the quantity, changed the structure, and then we came and did the multivalued field structure. And I think that's all the structure changes. But then we learned to use the dangerous update queries. There is one there. I even put the word dangerous in it. Right-clicking Design View is safe. Just opening it makes it want to run that query. So if it's an update query, we want to see what it's going to do first before running it. And if I didn't remember that, if I double-click on it, it will usually give me a warning. Hey, wait a minute, do you really want to run this? It's going to be something you can't undo. So I'm going to click No and right-click Design View because I want to see what it does. And I see, oh, every product type is going to be updated to VAC if I run this update query. And so if I wanted to do that mass update, that would just give me a warning of what it's going to do. Since there's no criteria, that means it's going to change everything. So update queries are dangerous. And I just messed with that, so I know I'm not going to save those changes. But even more dangerous are mass deletes. And that's when you really want to be careful about it. And, oh, I guess we're not building one. They just show you that you can do a mass delete. If you do a create query design, see, I can change it into a delete query after deciding what goes in the query. But we're not going to do that, just to know that delete queries are even more dangerous. Again, telling us, back up the database before we let those people make changes to it. Ask your IT person, are we backing up this database? This is important to our company. Are we backing it up? You're going to be the manager, maybe not know so much about databases, but you'll have that in the back of your mind is databases are important to us. Do we have a backup? And always ask that question. Don't be embarrassed to ask any new IT person or make sure it's brought up by management in the IT of when backups are happening. That is your main defense against some of these hacks. Some you just can't defend against everything. You can pay lots and lots of money to people to defend against everything, but it's in the long run, being able to go back after something gets hacked is the most cost-effective way of recovering, because those people that do cybersecurity and fix it, they cost a lot of money. It doesn't cost much. You just have the extra storage, you buy another huge drive, and back up your stuff constantly. And of course, now you have the backup to the cloud. That's not free, but that's available. So you don't have to go buy a disk drive. You can buy space in the cloud. But don't trust the cloud for everything. Have your own backup as well. Okay, so now we're going to make some more changes in the veterinary vendors table. Let's check our zip code field. Remember, in the veterinary vendors, right-click Design View, and in the zip code field, let's see, right now it's wasting a lot of room. It doesn't need to have 255 field size there. I can shorten that to 20. Even that seems kind of long, but in the book say, let's shorten the zip code to size 20. And basically, when you're creating records, I believe it's reserving that much room for things. And so you're reserving a lot of room you don't need. But remember, if there was data that was longer than 20, it's going to shorten it to 20. And so when you save changes here from field size from 255 to 20, and then I go to save, Control S, it's going to warn me, you know what? If you have anything longer than 20 characters, it's going to be cut off. So this scary warning, and to warn you, you may lose data. So shortening fields is another thing that may throw away some data. Lengthening fields, you're not throwing away data, so it won't warn you. But I know that all my zip codes are not longer than 20. If they are, they shouldn't be, so I'm going to go click yes. And then if I look at my zip code or my veterinary vendor's datasheet view, or the vendor's datasheet view, I see that, yeah, they weren't very long at all in the first place. So again, another change we made to the structure was how long the text can be in the zip code. So make sure your zip code has been shortened to only allow up to 20 characters in the zip code. Another thing we want to do, and this is a very often you'll see this on web pages that are based on databases, is we can't enter any information about a vendor without the vendor having a name. It doesn't make sense to even have a record about them. So we want to make sure if we're ever entering data into this table that if they enter a record about a vendor, they better not leave the vendor name blank. And on web pages and forums, you see that all the time. So the way to do that in a database, we have a required that I can turn to yes. By default, it's no. I can just double click and it toggles it to yes. Double click again and it toggles it to no. Or I could use my selector thingy and choose yes or no. But the double click is faster. So required yes. This will mean if I have data that has a blank vendor name, it's going to say, wait a minute, I'm not going to let you. You better go fill that in first before making it required, because we have data that doesn't satisfy that rule of the data. So now I click yes, save the changes, and it's going to warn me I'm making a rule now that certain fields are required, and in case your database is really big, it may take time. Well, we know that our table is small, so we don't worry about the taking time. And it does introduce a word here called data integrity. That is basically the data better follow the rules that we're making. That's the data integrity rules. So I click yes, and I see back in the database that, yeah, the name was there for all of them. And so making it required didn't show that any lines were breaking the rules, the database integrity rules. So we made the vendor name required. Let's see if we're making anything else. Oh, we would like now to edit the quantity field. So I'm going to go back to Design View. And in the quantity, it doesn't make sense for quantity to ever be less than 0. And we do want a limit on how large a number they could put in the quantity. So we put in a validation rule right here. So we're learning about some of these properties, just getting a little taste. Don't worry about memorizing them all. But validation rule is something good to know. The rule we're going to put here is greater than 0. Just the right next to the question mark, the greater than symbol, and the word and less than and equal one after another. That means and less than or equal to 1,000. So now we've added another rule that they couldn't enter a negative number or even 0. It doesn't make, well, to me, it ought to be able to enter 0, like, hey, we just ran out of that. But they made a rule. You can't enter 0 for quantity. You could enter 0.00001. I think it makes more sense to be greater than or equal to 0, but we'll go with what the book said. Greater than 0 and less than 1,000. This may be the reorder quantity, perhaps. And that's the validation rule on the quantity field. Okay, now let's go ahead and zip over to Datasheet View, saving the changes as I go. And again, it's doing the data integrity check if we're a big table. Now let's see what the effect of that rule is. Let's go over to quantity and try to enter 5,000 for quantity of the feline rabies. I hit enter, and it gives me not a very meaningful or kind of a scary message. One of our values are prohibited by the validation rule this, and enter a value that expression that this field can accept. So it's giving a very intimidating, nasty message. So let's fix that message to not be so unfriendly. One thing about this is it doesn't do the change for you. You can do a Control Z though and go back to the previous value. Let's fix this so it's not giving us such a nasty message by again going to Design View, and let's change the validation text to be a little friendlier. And we'll put in there, please enter a number greater than 0, greater than 0, and less, and up to 1. We'll make it simple, up to 1,000. I could have said and less than or equal to 1,000, but let's simplify it. Up to 1,000. And using the word please, that nerds and technical writers and software engineers don't put enough of this, making people feel stupid and feeling like they're getting a rude message. Always put please in there, and it just softens the message. Now, let's go back over to Datasheet View. Let's go back over to Datasheet View and saving the changes. And now let's see what happens if I try to enter 5,000 there this time and enter. Now I get a little friendlier message. It still doesn't fix it for me, putting it back to the previous value. Maybe I should put in parentheses, hit Control Z to undo. I think I'll put that in my message because that's friendly enough. Oh, it won't let me leave until I Control Z that. There we go. Now it'll let me go back to Design View. And I'll put in here CTL Z to undo changes. Little helpful thing, just because Access is confusing but very powerful. So we added a validation rule and friendly text about it. Let's see if they have us do any more validation rules. Let's see, on product type. For product type, we're going to check another property here. We want to make product type to have a default product type rather than making me type it every time. Since most of the time that it's going to be a vaccination, let's just make the default value VAC. So I put VAC. I think that we'll put quotes around it if I go to the next line. Yeah, put quotes around it. So now, when I go edit records, I can skip having to type it if it were already VAC. And are we going to add allowable values? Yes. We're also going to add a rule here to keep them to make them only choose one of these three. Now I could have come over here, I think I could have done a limit to list, but they decide to put it here instead. We'll see the difference. So just to practice our validation rule, we're going to add the validation rule equal VAC, no quotes needed, the word or, equal MC, or equal SUP. And again, let's do something friendly on the validation text of please enter one of VAC, MC, or SUP. And I'll add again CTL Z to undo. So just getting another little taste of what this can do for us when we're entering data. And the reason we spend time on this is to remind you that since the data in our database tables is used by all the software that generates reports, that produces totals of things, we need to make sure the integrity of that data is good on the way in. When someone's entering data, they don't enter bad data. So adding these rules is putting like a little safety thing, just like on forms online. They don't let you leave or don't let you hit the register for this website, so their database doesn't have somebody's address with no name or not knowing what they registered for or what they're interested in. Make it required field because the database requires that. So now I can go back to Datasheet View, save the table, yes, checking the integrity. You'll get that anytime you add a rule. And now let's try to change this to something other than vec. Let's just leave the C off and try to go to another field. Oh, won't let me do it. And Control Z undoes the change to the data, and now it's happy. I won't find out if it's happy until I try to leave that line. That's just the way databases work. So we've added that validation rule, and we've saved them. And we've updated some values. And I've done that already. Just seeing what the result is of changing those validation rules. Let's see. They'd like to change just a few more things, just because this is a common thing to do. On our veterinary vendors, we want to change for this guy's address, we want to add something right after the word Haven. We're going to call that Haven Boulevard. So we're updating data. Just like Excel, I can adjust the width of that column and update that entry. And I can arrow key or tab to go right. Does Shift tab? Yeah, Shift tab takes me left, tab takes me right, or left and right arrow key. They seem more natural to me, left and right arrow key. And because we did adjust the column, when I save it, it's going to ask, or if I close it, I did a Control S just to save those changes I made to the column width. So we've already seen the use of the lookup fields. I demonstrated that. That's a lookup field there. It shows the use of that as a drop-down. In the appointments, we see the lookup field here. And don't worry about it. You can just enter random data here. I think in the book they have you do some settings, but it's just to practice how it all works. Don't worry that you have to get any appointments exact. Just know that this gives you lots of either single value from a drop-down or multiple values. Notice this one did give you validation rules on treatments. Let's take a look at that under Home Design View on treatments. Because the lookup gave us multiple values, look at this. It automatically turned on limit to list. So I don't have to add a validation rule. The limit to list has already put that in there for me. So since I can't change it, I don't need to worry about a validation rule because it's already limited to what's there. And let's just check that just for fun. Let's go there and let's see if I could type something here. Oh, doesn't even let me type. I can only click a check. This is a better way of managing input because you don't have to worry about writing rules or putting up error messages. You just make it work so only what's here could be selected. So I do like the limit to list better than a validation rule and then composing a message. Because usually the message is either rude or confusing. Let it just not work unless they enter the, or they can only choose something that will work. And that's something that those people that design web pages should know about. So we looked at totals, we looked at grid lines, colors and font. You don't need to worry about colors and font. That's something to worry about later. Multivalued fields and queries. Let's go back to queries because that's really where most of the skill is needed by, or you need to have an understanding of. So I'm going to jump ahead to where they write a query for the appointments table. This is where the power is in databases. So we're going to write a query on the appointment table. So select the appointments table, create, query design. Actually, didn't matter if I selected. I'm going to double click appointments table and close. And what we want to see here from the appointments table is the appointment ID, patient ID, appointment date, and treatment number. And before worrying about any criteria or sorting or anything, let's just see what I get for the data. Now, there's all the data from all the appointments in the column order that I requested. Now I can go back to Design View, and now we can put in some criteria. Oh, we're not even putting in criteria. We're just showing what the results would be when I include a multi-valued field in a query. Let's add treatments. This is a single treatment number. Let's go back and add the treatments field that I know this one has the multiple values. Let's add that one as well and see how that looks when I go to Datasheet View. Just like we saw in the table, it shows me all the selected treatments. And it actually lets me change them, which is kind of weird. You would think on a query you're only reading information, but you can actually update the data in the table, which to me isn't intuitive. I would expect a query only to show me what's in there, but it actually lets you change the data when you're peeking at those columns in the table. So this is the treatments. This is treatment number that only had the single value typed in. This is that multi-value field we created. Okay. Multiple rows. Oh, this one, I forget, they want this one to save this one as M03Q01. So let's save this query. Just as evidence that we've been here. Haven't saved it for a while. M03Q01. And let's call it query on multi-valued field. Nothing exciting there. It's just as though I were seeing that column in the table. So remember, queries are basically a peek at your information with the fields that you specify in your query. You can also specify criteria to make it even more meaningful. Criteria is where the power of queries really comes in. So I wrote some queries. Now, one more big concept. I think this is our last major concept here with databases. And they give you a little intro in the book, but let me give you the short version of this. Suppose I have a patient. I can go in here and specify the patient. I can go to the patient's table and specify an owner and fat finger that keyboard and hit twos there. Now these patients are these poor little cats and dogs. I have just given a patient an owner that does not exist. I can close the patient's table. Access is perfectly fine. I go to find owners and their patients, and I come to this patient's pepper, and I don't have the owner. Let's say we need to send out a warning that there's a new law that you have to leash your dog at a certain time, or you can't let them sit on the back porch anymore, or they're no longer allowed to bark. We can't send this information because this owner, 022, does not exist. We have an orphan pet because 022 isn't in our table. Our referential integrity, we call this, means we are referring to an owner that doesn't exist. We've got a big problem. That poor pet is going to be lost, so we're not going to inform them about their necessary vaccinations, and we've spread disease across the world because their vaccination failed. So I'm going to fix that to put it to a known owner, and now we're going to make access enforce that rule, that we can't refer to an owner that doesn't exist. Okay, that's the whole idea about referential integrity. Now that you got the short explanation of referential integrity, here is how we enforce referential integrity. There is a tool in the database's tools called relationships. We're going to use this relationships tool to establish this idea that there must be a owner that exists when I connect a patient to an owner. So I open up relationships, and for now I only care about two tables, the owners and patients table. And I drag the owner ID from the patients table right there. I click and drag that owner ID to the owner ID in the owners table, basically telling Access, I want to enforce a rule about this relationship between the owner ID in the owners table and the owner ID in the patients table. And all we do is click Enforce Referential Integrity, which means if I ever try to refer to an owner that doesn't exist, it will keep me from doing that. If I ever go delete or make a change to an owner ID, I can also automatically make sure that anyone referring to that new owner or the deleted owner also gets their record removed. Because if we remove an owner from our database, we also need to remove all that owner's pets, patients, from our patients table. So that's what the cascade delete means and the cascade update. And this one-to-many thing, that gets into the details of database design. And we have a whole class that goes over all this. So now when I click create, it will draw a little line there. And if the data already violated that rule, it would have kept me from establishing referential integrity. Now let's close the relationships, saving the changes. And let's go back to our patients table and try to enter 022 this time. And hit enter. It will say, sorry, you don't have an owner 022. But it doesn't say it that way. It makes it a little more nerdy. You cannot add or change a record because a related record is required in table owners. Not as obvious what the problem is, but again, a Control-Z would take me back and it would not complain, oh, wait a minute, you violated referential integrity. So that's the idea. We don't want records that if they're referring to something, that something doesn't exist. We want all the lines, if I'm referring to, let's see, what else do we have? In the treatment cost, if someone's referring to a treatment number in the appointments table, we don't want them to be referring to a non-existent treatment number. So we want that relationship as well. And in the book, they want us to specify, let's see what relationship, owners and patients. Yeah, they did the owner ID relationship. Now, in the book, they did do the cascade delete, but I like the cascade delete as well. Let's see if we have any other relationships we should establish here. Let's see, the patients, do they have any reference? They have a reference to an owner. These names, those are all typed in. So there's no other references there. Let's try the treatment. Let's try veterinarians. Well, there's veterinarians name. Are they related to anything? Let's see. Appointments. There we go. Veterinarians or the appointments table needs to refer to a veterinarian. Well, we want to be sure that we don't refer to a non-existent veterinarian. And just for now, I'm going to put in veterinarian 011. And I'm going to go try and establish that relationship. So I'm going to close the appointments table, go back to my database tools, relationships. Let's add the table veterinarian appointments and veterinarians. So show table, appointments, double click, and double click veterinarians. And I'm going to try to establish this relationship of when I'm referring to a veterinarian, that this veterinarian is a relationship. So for a veterinarian appointment means I'm referring to the veterinarian's ID in the veterinarian. So I click and drag, the plus shows up. Now it'll let me create the relationship, no problem. But if I double click on that line and I say, well, let's enforce referential integrity so you can't refer to a non-existent veterinarian, it's going to say, wait a minute, you broke the rules. I cannot establish referential integrity because there's a veterinarian that does not exist. I'm trying to refer to veterinarian 011, and that breaks the rule. So it will let me establish the relationship, but I first have to go fix the appointments table, stop referring to the wrong veterinarian, and then come, and now it should let me establish the relationship without a problem. So it doesn't go change the data. It says, wait, if you're already breaking the rules, I'm not going to let you enforce. And I could, of course, do the cascade update and delete, meaning if I delete a veterinarian, it'll delete any appointments that are referring to that veterinarian. Now, do you see any other relationships here? How about this? I'm referring to a patient in an appointment. Well, that means it better be an existing patient. So I drag patient here to this patient here and enforce referential integrity. And the update is most convenient. I'll go ahead and cascade delete as well. Uh-oh. Let's try, it didn't like that. Let's try only enforce referential integrity. Uh-oh, we've got a problem. We're referring to a patient that doesn't exist. I found a problem, and I don't think it was my fault. Let's turn off referential integrity and see if we can find where is this going off. We seem to be referring to a patient that doesn't exist in our appointments table. Let's go check. Appointments table, our patients, F1C2, F1C1. Oh, I remember, I think we changed our names. Let's see here. Patients table has only P numbers in there. Look at that. When we changed our patients' IDs, we forgot to go back and update our patient ID table. And I don't remember what F1 used to be. Let's see here. Patients F1, I think it was the upper range. I think that is P12 now. Was F1 before? So let's go back and fix that. That'd be P-12. So this is why you don't want to accidentally refer to the wrong one, because now I've got to go figure it out manually what the new patient IDs are. Messed me up completely. And I think the last one is P11 was the previous C1. So let's go back to the appointments, and P11 is C1. And now, let's see, C2 was C2. C2 now is, I think, we'll make that P1. Doesn't really matter if I have the wrong one. They're just manually making the corrections. Might be messing up, but I'm now referring to existing patients. If we had established cascade update, when I went back and changed those, my appointment table would have correctly reflected the new name. Now, I can go to the relationships, and I think it will let me establish referential integrity now. Click OK. Oh, another thing, if the appointments table that is in use, I need to close it. Otherwise, it doesn't like to do the relationships things. And saving the changes to the table now, let's see if it'll let me establish referential integrity. Oh, the patients table needs to be closed too. It does not like to have those things open while I'm updating the rules. Now, click on the line correctly. There we go. Now, it's happy. Now, I may have messed up, but I'm making sure I'm not referring to a non-existent patient. I may have messed up on what the appointment patient was. So another lesson here is, if you're working with relationships, You can edit your tables, but you have to close them before you can update those. Okay, so let's see other relationships we have here. Well, we're referring to a treatment number. Well, isn't that in our treatment cost table? Let's show the treatment cost table. And let's establish that relationship. When I'm referring to a treatment, it's in the treatment cost table and enforce, and now I have those relationships. So anytime I'm referring to, and if you notice the pattern here, I can only there needs to be the one with the key on the one side of the connection. That's why Access likes the primary key. If this weren't a primary key, it doesn't like this kind of, or complains about that connection. So the relationship is between, I'm referring to somebody, I better make sure that they exist. If I'm referring to a treatment, it better exist. That's the enforced referential integrity. That's what that's all about. And this is as deep as we get into concepts about databases, that when we're doing these things called relational databases, those programmers or database experts or designers, these are the things that they have to think about when they come and interview you about setting up a database for your application or for your company. They're figuring out, well, what are the relationships between employers and the job they're doing, or the customer and the product that they're buying, or you're tracking them with a mobile app. This is all figured out back in the programming of the app for you. And if they mention this now, you'll have some idea. Yeah, back in the database, not only do we have tables, but we need to know how they are related to one another. And that's where databases, as complex as they are, hopefully giving you a little bit better understanding why database programmers are very well paid. They have to understand all this kind of stuff. But Microsoft has attempted to give you a tool built in Office that tries to make databases a little friendly to the masses. But it's hard to make it super friendly because it's kind of a complex idea. And so establishing referential integrity, that's the last thing we do, I think, here. Yeah, that's the last thing we do with Access Project 3. If I ever want to check, do I have referential integrity working? I can always go back to my tools, open up relationships, and I see the established relationships. Now, if I ever try to enter an appointment with the wrong patient or the wrong treatment, it won't let me. It'll say, sorry, referential, the rules require you to be referring to an existing patient. But it makes a very confusing message most of the time. So with that, you can save Access Project 3, upload it to Schoology, and I think that's a good stopping point. When you come back after Easter, we'll be playing with a Bible database, just kind of to get a fresh look at, hey, how it could be useful with some other data. I think you'll have fun with that, just practicing some queries. And then reviewing for the final with databases and spreadsheets, so you'll all be able to ace that fun. All right. Have a great Easter. Upload Schoology, and I'll be catching up on the grading of all that fun stuff. And this is